Hi, my name is Matthew Jester, and this video is Billie Eilish and post-hypnotic suggestions. So I have a certificate of completion to show that I'm certified and competent in the field of hypnosis. This is from MikeMandelHypnosisAcademy.com. Anyways, I also have a news article. This is referencing the celebrity Billie Eilish and the alleged death threat letters that she received. This is from TMZ, so you can go on their website and download the same letters if you would like to. I'll start with my introduction. Please watch my video, Hypnosis, Abuse, and Speech Inhibition. I will leave a link to watch the video in the description. I will also leave additional links in the description about other relevant videos. I've been tortured and abused with hypnosis, and my ability to speak is being inhibited with hypnosis, which is why I have to read everything when I make videos. If you notice me stuttering, speaking slowly, being unable to speak clearly, or any other difficulty speaking, I explain in detail the specific methods and techniques that are being used to inhibit my ability to speak in my video, Hypnosis, Abuse, and Speech Inhibition. These issues speak and occur consistently in each of my videos, specifically within the first 3 minutes. The hypnosis inhibiting my ability to speak is often very noticeable throughout my videos, and I will leave a list of the various hypnotic commands that are specifically being used that can be recognized in my body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, and speech patterns in the description. And if I touch my nose, that is me pointing out hypnotic speech impairment without interrupting the video. So, like I said earlier, this video is Billie Eilish and post-hypnotic suggestions, which is the technical terminology for hypnotic commands. A series of post-hypnotic suggestions and hypnotic metaphors were used on me that specifically pertain to the death threat letters Billie Eilish received from John Matthew Hurl. These post-hypnotic suggestions and hypnotic metaphors were given to me before Billie Eilish ever received the death threat letters, further indicating that the alleged death threat letters were premeditated by the same organized criminal operation that hypnotized me. A metaphor relates two or more unrelated subjects using symbolism. Hypnotic metaphors distract and entertain your conscious awareness and attention with a story so that hypnotic commands can be cued, given, and elicited without being detected or noticed. An isomorphic metaphor relates unrelated subjects using symbolism that relates to a specific situation or problem in an individual's life. Isomorphic metaphors often require understanding of the specific situation or problem the metaphor is related to in order to comprehend and understand the metaphor. Nested loop metaphors are metaphors within metaphors, typically consisting of at least 3 different metaphors. For example, story A tells story B tells story C, then after finishing story C, looping back around to return to and finish story B, then after finishing story B, returning to and finishing story A. The concept may sound fairly confusing, although nested loop metaphors intentionally use confusion to give and elicit post-hypnotic suggestions undetected. So, I'm also going to be referring to nested loop metaphors as embedded loop metaphors throughout the video, just to let you know. So, incomplete metaphors provide an illogical and unreasonable relation between unrelated subjects in all contexts due to incomplete symbolism. So, incomplete metaphors won't exactly make sense. In order to discredit me, I was hypnotized to only be able to articulate incomplete metaphors so that I wouldn't notice, so that I would seem insane or, sorry about that. In order to discredit me, I was hypnotized to only be able to articulate incomplete metaphors so that I would seem insane whenever I attempted to explain any of the hypnotic metaphors they used on me to someone. All of these different types of metaphors were used on me, so several of the metaphors may not make sense and may be very confusing until the specific situations the metaphors are referencing are completely explained and until the nested loops of metaphors are completed. In this video, I'm going to explain the different post-hypnotic suggestions or hypnotic commands and hypnotic metaphors used on me that were related to Billie Eilish and specifically the death threat letters Billie Eilish received. So, I'm going to start with just talking about something called the critical faculty. In hypnosis, there is a concept known as the critical faculty, which is responsible for processing, interpreting, analyzing, and questioning information before acceptance into the unconscious mind. Children under the age of 7 have underdeveloped critical faculties that readily accept information without questioning, processing, analyzing, or interpreting that information. An example of this would be how children believe in the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, etc. In the deep hypnotic trance called somnambulism, which is commonly seen in staged hypnosis shows, the critical faculty can be less capable of rejecting information than that of a small child's. So again, the critical faculty can be less capable of rejecting information than that of a small child's in a very deep hypnotic trance. In fact, hypnosis can be considered extremely dangerous when utilized unethically to make a victim appear to be mentally ill by replicating the presentations of symptoms such as paranoia, hallucinations, and delusions. An example of this is how a young child believing in the Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, or Santa Claus is obviously completely normal and is not a symptom of paranoia, hallucinations, or delusions. The same is true with hypnosis, although to even more extreme extents. For susceptible individuals, from clucking like a chicken or meowing like a cat to believing they can fluently speak a language they don't even know, and speak complete gibberish thinking that they're fluently speaking a different language, like believing they're actually communicating. And to believing their tennis shoe is a telephone and believing they had a conversation with someone that called their shoe. Just like when dreaming, the abnormal and scientifically impossible perceptions are simply produced by our unconscious minds and are not symptomatic of mental illness. Okay? So, this story sounds difficult to believe, although with an understanding of how hypnosis works and the phenomena that hypnosis can produce, it's easy to understand how they were able to get me to believe what they did using hypnosis. The people that hypnotized me impersonated the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I was told that I was going to make a movie for the Make-A-Wish Foundation and that the Make-A-Wish Foundation was going to give me, quote, everything I wanted. I was told that they were going to hypnotize someone to commit suicide to prevent me from committing suicide. I was told that all I needed to do was ensure to buy him cigarettes and he wouldn't kill himself, but if he didn't have cigarettes, that he was going to think that the Mexican cartel was going to kill him. McKay Cody James discussed feelings of suicide and fears that the Mexican cartel was going to kill him before he killed himself. I found his body hanging from a tree while looking for a tree to hang myself on to commit suicide. This actually worked to prevent me from using the noose knot to commit suicide prior to finding his body, because I had to call the police and file a police report. When I first found his body, I didn't know I found a dead body and thought it was a Halloween decoration that was left hanging out from a tree. Of course, this was from a distance as well. I found a large branch and poked his stomach to see if his stomach decompressed. It didn't. It was actually very stiff, but when I got close enough, I smelled a strong odor and saw maggots crawling out of his face, which was blue and purple, completely unable to recognize his face. I checked his wallet for ID, which read McKay Cody James, and called the police after washing my hands. I returned to the camp after I finished talking to the police and discovered my friend who mysteriously disappeared one day, named Cody, actually introduced himself to me by his middle name because his full name was McKay Cody James. After discovering I didn't just poke a dead body with a stick, I poked my dead friend with a stick. I developed an eating disorder and PTSD from it. I was hypnotized to believe that my friend died because of a freak accident during the movie production instead of him being murdered with hypnosis. I was hypnotized to think it was my fault he committed suicide because I didn't buy him cigarettes, but at the time I didn't even know he was hypnotized, let alone hypnotized to commit suicide without cigarettes. Very similar type of situation to, like, say, for example, believing a stunt double got hurt making a movie, and like that was the kind of concept that they introduced to me, like it was an accident in a movie and somebody got hurt or injured or actually killed. I was hypnotized to think it was my fault he committed suicide because I didn't buy him cigarettes, but at the time I didn't even know he was hypnotized, let alone hypnotized to commit suicide without cigarettes. Since I was already taking tranquilizer medication and frequently visited the emergency room, I was hypnotized to think the tranquilizer medication Klonopin meant it's not my fault and that the tranquilizer medication Valium meant I didn't know. I was hypnotized to think any emergency room visit was a movie scene and that these medications were supposed to represent different movie scripts. That it's not my fault meant it's not my fault I wanted to kill him, and that I didn't know meant I didn't know he was hypnotized to commit suicide if I didn't buy him cigarettes. I was hypnotized to think Klonopin meant I was making movie scenes, and that Valium meant an emergency medical intervention for my movie. I was hypnotized to believe that hypnosis was inhibiting me because I didn't care enough about Cody in an attempt to abuse me for witnessing his murder without me knowing it. Since I sincerely cared about Cody, the post-hypnotic suggestion to believe otherwise was completely ineffective, which cued the post-hypnotic suggestion to think that I shouldn't think about my dead friend so much during my movie, because then people would find out that someone died making my movie for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. The people that hypnotized me also threatened me that for talking about my dead friend. I was threatened that they were going to use my innocence regarding the situation with my dead friend Cody to make Donald Trump seem innocent and frame me for it. I explained his involvement a little bit later and in more further detail even later in a different video. I was also hypnotized to think that my dead friend smelled fragrant before eating to keep me from eating. So, these are some various post-hypnotic suggestions that referred specifically to Billie Eilish. I was hypnotized to feel euphoria, pleasant feelings, which is what euphoria means, listening to Billie Eilish's music as a form of reward and positive reinforcement to get me to start listening to her music. I was hypnotized to think that I was hypnotized to listen to Billie Eilish because I liked Justin Bieber's music as part of the plot for my movie. I was hypnotized to think that as part of my contract with the Make-A-Wish Foundation that Billie Eilish was going to help me make a movie if Justin Bieber was my favorite artist. I was hypnotized to think that if Justin Bieber was my favorite artist, that me and Billie Eilish would be dating and physically intimate in my movie. I was also hypnotized to think that it was part of my contract that if Justin Bieber wasn't my favorite artist, that Billie Eilish couldn't be involved in my movie because it wouldn't look good for Justin Bieber's image if I didn't like Justin Bieber's music because I listened to Billie Eilish's music. I was hypnotized to think that if I liked Phineas, that it meant I would be like Billie Eilish's brother, implying that I was in the, quote, friend zone. I was hypnotized to think that Justin Bieber meant my friend McKay Cody James, who was murdered by being hypnotized to commit suicide. Or represented that. Specifically with his mustache. I was also, when he had his mustache, I was also hypnotized to think that Justin Bieber's song Intentions referenced my intentions regarding McKay Cody James' death. I was also hypnotized to think that I was hypnotized to listen to Billie Eilish's music as much as Kathleen Islin and Peter J. Islin loved each other for framing me for assault charges I didn't commit. I was hypnotized to think that Billie Eilish was dead or dying if I was going to put Kathleen Islin and Peter J. Islin in prison. I was hypnotized to think that I should listen to Billie Eilish's music if I was sick of being gaslighted and hypnotized to think that I should listen to Phineas's music if I was sick of being financially exploited. I was also hypnotized to think I should listen to Billie Eilish's music if I was investigating a murder because she did a song for the James Bond movie and to think her music in general had a James Bond theme. And there's some hypnotic metaphors and post-hypnotic suggestions referencing some songs. So this one's probably the most specific. This is referencing the Billie Eilish song, I Don't Want to Be You Anymore. When I was hypnotized, I was told that they were going to abuse me so much that I wasn't going to want to be myself anymore, so they were going to hypnotize me to act like I was someone else for my movie. And that they came up with the idea from the Billie Eilish song, I Don't Want to Be You Anymore. This was a hypnotic metaphor that was intended to reinforce the belief that I was making a movie and to confuse, entertain, and distract my conscious attention so that hypnotic commands could be elicited without being questioned or detected. This was most specifically done as a method of making me appear mentally ill by hypnotizing me to think that I was hypnotized to feel and act how my perpetrators would feel and act, as well as hypnotizing me to act angry when I, quote, ruined something they did to abuse me, because they were angry that I ruined that. This hypnotic metaphor made me feel as if I was taunting and mocking my perpetrators by being hypnotized to feel angry and made me believe I was proving my point very well, when in all reality, the hypnotic metaphor confused me to the extent that I didn't even know this was only done to make me seem insane whenever I attempted to expose the criminal operation. Moving on, so this is referencing a song called Lo Vas a Olvidar. That's Spanish for You're Going to Forget It. And this is by Billie Eilish and Rosalia. I was hypnotized to think that listening to Rosalia meant I needed to be able to feel fear and didn't understand why. I played a song of hers randomly out of curiosity, and of course the lyrics were in Spanish. Since I didn't speak Spanish, I obviously didn't understand the lyrics and was cued to think, I don't understand, and to remember I started listening to Rosalia because she sang a song with Billie Eilish for the HBO series Euphoria. And since I was hypnotized to feel euphoria in order to force me to listen to her music, it implied that hypnotizing me to feel euphoria was comparable to listening to a song in Spanish because I wouldn't understand it. The euphoria and operant conditioning was a method of inhibiting my survival instincts. And also quickly referencing Christine Price being the hypnotherapist, who was a therapist that I was seeing just for therapy, not hypnotherapy, that hypnotized me. She kept telling me that a lot of the post-hypnotic suggestions and hypnotic commands meant you think it's a good thing, but it's not. And then moving on with post-hypnotic suggestions and metaphors relating to Billie Eilish's album called When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? I was hypnotized to think that Billie Eilish made this album for my movie and that the album was a reference to sleep deprivation and resulting medical malpractice cases because of the album title When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? I was also hypnotized to think it was a reference to developing PTSD from sleep deprivation because she is depicted on the album cover as visually similar to the Russian sleep experiment internet story depiction of the results of the experiment. So, the people in the experiment. I was hypnotized to think that the subjects. I was hypnotized to think that the album was also a reference to atheism, referencing the question, where do we go when we die? Then, Ocean Eyes, another song by Billie Eilish. I was hypnotized to think the song showed my innocence because I was just trying to make a viral YouTube video. I was also hypnotized to think the song meant they were going to dump Billie Eilish's body into the ocean to dispose of the evidence. I was also hypnotized to think the song meant my dog Jewel because she has two different colored eyes, even though in this context she technically have an ocean eye because one of them is moreover like colored like the ocean, the other one is brown. But regardless, the next one is Therefore I Am, and another hypnotic metaphors and song by Billie Eilish. Hypnotized to imagine the social worker from Jordan Valley Medical Center walking a fine line, and to imagine her putting one foot in front of the other as if she was walking a tightrope. I was hypnotized to think the fine line represented right and wrong because there is a fine line between right and wrong, and they're crossing it just like how you cross your T's. In handwriting, which is actually a reference to handwriting analysis, by the way, knowing that I would go that far. There were several unethical lines crossed, including hindering innocent people from receiving life-saving resources, threatening to kill Billie Eilish and my friends and family, and committing several murders, and that once they crossed one line, they crossed all of them. In fact, for these people, like a sociopath and a psychopath, typically, that line between right and wrong, those lines are like morality, they don't exist. They have no empathy, they have no regret, and they have no remorse. That's why they're often depicted as completely heartless, cold-blooded, and, your serial killers are also going to be sociopaths and psychopaths. And white-collar sociopaths, for example, that would be like, a business person that would, do anything to make money, no matter who got hurt. So, next one is No Time to Die. I was hypnotized to think a watch face, or a clock, right, meant no time to die because watches and clocks tell time. I was hypnotized to think a pocket watch meant murder with hypnosis because pocket watches have notoriously been used for hypnotic inductions, and since my friend McKay Cody James was murdered by being hypnotized to commit suicide, that it changed the meaning to no, time to die, implying no, it is actually time to die. So, this we're going to start with a little bit more complicated and intricate of a hypnotic metaphor. And a lot of these will loop together. And there's a lot more songs that had a lot of hypnotic metaphors and meanings that they told me. But, I explained that in detail and elsewhere. I'll post a link to the document. It's a Google Docs document. Anyways, when I was hypnotized, they referenced a Dane Cook joke about doing a, quote, B and E. which stood for breaking and entering. They said that they were going to do a B and E, but instead of breaking and entering, B and E was going to stand for a Billie and Eilish, which is why the B and E and the because acronym, they told me, stood for Billie Eilish. So, moving on from that, I will be getting to that here shortly. And in an attempt to demoralize me, I was threatened for looking up to Jesus Christ as a role model. I am an atheist, although from a scientific and historical perspective, I looked up to Jesus Christ as a role model and wanted to be like him because of his unconditional love and selflessness. I also looked up to George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Buddha, and Mahatma Gandhi for similar principles and values, but I was only specifically threatened for looking up to Jesus as a role model, likely because it could be used as a frightening example. Since I noticed a lot of problems in society that are frequently discussed but not properly resolved, I strive to find practical resolutions to these problems and apply them. I strive to rise above all the evil, greed, and corruption in the world so that I could help people and change the world. And I was threatened that by doing this, I would be like Jesus Christ because I would be acting like a, quote, savior by saving everyone from all the evil, greed, and corruption in the world. They threatened that they wanted history to repeat itself if I was behaving Christ-like because I could be like Jesus and, quote, die for their sins. This threat was an attempt to demoralize me by making me scared of looking up to Jesus Christ as a role model and behaving selflessly and morally. I was also hypnotized to think that if I tried to snitch, that the threat would reference Billie Eilish being Jesus dying for their sins, except the Spanish pronunciation Jesus, because they said they were going to use her as an example of what they would do to snitches, like how the Mexican cartel made examples of what they do to snitches by decapitating them using a chainsaw. I was also threatened that they were going to make me look bad for helping people and trying to do the right thing because they'd abused me so much I'd make helping people and doing the right thing seem scary, and that they were going to use Billie Eilish as an example of what they do to people for trying to preserve the environment. The because acronym stood for Billie Eilish, cartel, anyone useless snitches eventually. That's that one for you. And then this is a reference for All the Good Girls Go to Hell. I was hypnotized to think that the song All the Good Girls Go to Hell meant that they were going to make an example out of Billie Eilish for her political activism for environmental preservation by making her die for our sins like Jesus. I was hypnotized to imagine Billie being tied to a chair and decapitated with a chainsaw when I looked at her album cover with her sitting on the edge of the bed when I listened to the song All the Good Girls Go to Hell. I was also hypnotized to think All the Good Girls Go to Hell meant all the gaslighters go to hell, which we can also interpret all the gaslighters go to jail in a literal sense after I make gaslighting illegal with a petition I have. I'll actually include that in the link specifically. So, moving along. It's just an outline for the petition, by the way, so we'll of course have to elaborate on more details, but just basic concepts. After using a Wendy's restroom, this is regarding Billie Eilish, phone post-hypnotic suggestions and metaphors, and Bill Gates. After using a Wendy's restroom, After using a Wendy's restaurant restroom, I was hypnotized to think that since I was planning to use the internet to help me make history, and that since Bill Gates made the internet, that Bill Gates wanted to look good in history, so that he was going to help to pay to keep Billie Eilish safe / alive for me under the condition that I married her. I was also hypnotized to think that it was my fault if she died for not marrying her, and that I should feel guilty because it would make her life seem insignificant if I thought she was so ugly that I wouldn't even marry her if her life literally depended on it. Since I was threatened that they were going to kill Billie Eilish, I was hypnotized to think that posting all the hypnotic metaphors and post-hypnotic suggestions on Facebook was a method of protecting her because there would be evidence I was threatened and told about it before it would happen. So then the people that threatened her would be able to get wouldn't be able to get away with hurting her. Anyways, I was hypnotized to think of a Billy Gates metaphor, because since Bill Gates created the internet, that if I use the internet to protect Billie Eilish and keep her safe, that it would be like Bill Gates was protecting Billie Eilish and keeping her safe. I'm going to repeat that one last part one more time. I was hypnotized to think that since I was threatened that they were going to kill Billie Eilish, I was hypnotized to think that posting all the hypnotic metaphors and post-hypnotic suggestions on Facebook was a method of protecting her, because it would be evidence I was threatened and told about it before it would happen, so then the people that threatened her wouldn't be able to get away with hurting her. I was also hypnotized to think of a Billy Gates metaphor, because since Bill Gates created the internet, that if I use the internet to protect Billie Eilish and keep her safe, that it would be like Bill Gates was protecting Billie Eilish and keeping her safe. I can also relate this a little bit differently to Justin Bieber. And it's very interesting, actually. So, how that turned out. I was hypnotized to think that if I didn't have internet access, that Bill Gates couldn't help protect Billie Eilish without the internet, because I couldn't use it. Since I used my phone to access the internet, I was hypnotized to think that if my phone died, it meant Billie Eilish died, and that if my phone was dying, that Billie Eilish was dying. Except I was hypnotized to not know that my phone was that my phone dying was the hypnotic cue to think Billie Eilish was dying. Since I listened to Billie Eilish's music on my phone, I was hypnotized to think that if my phone died, that she died, because if I couldn't listen to her music, then she was dead to me. I was hypnotized to think of using Facebook to keep Billie Eilish alive, being similar to when I posted on Facebook about doctors abusing me, when it happened to protect myself, and everything along those lines, because I wanted to publicize, what doctors were doing to me and how they were trying to get me admitted to the state mental hospital for medical malpractice. So then I was posting it on Facebook, so that, I couldn't just mysteriously disappear, and it would be like on Facebook, where did Matt go? Check his Facebook. What just happened? That was the last thing he posted, right? I was also hypnotized to think he would offer to pay several $1 billion for ransoms, Bill Gates, because he wanted to look good in history. So moving on from that. Now the next one is... I'll just start reading it. I was hypnotized to think that Billie Eilish's political activism for environmental preservation was the primary reason she was given death threats, and I was hypnotized to think of a metaphorical comparison to Bill Nye the Science Guy, referring to them as Billie Nye the Science Guy and Billie Eilish because of their political views regarding climate change. And then this one is about Warren Buffett. I was also hypnotized to distract attention from Donald Trump and redirect my attention to Warren Buffett. And I'll have to explain that later. Let's see here. I'll try to put that there and see if I can explain that later. If not, it might be in the next one. So this one is about Billie Eilish and the cartoon The Simpsons, and a hypnotic metaphor related to that. When I was hypnotized, I was also told that my friend Delaney, named Delaney, wrote the Make-A-Wish Foundation for me, and that Donald Trump responded to the letter. They told me Donald Trump was a multi-billionaire and that he was going to make all my wishes come true and give me, quote, everything I wanted for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I was then told that the hypnosis was actually so that Donald Trump would get everything he wanted. The situation was compared to the cartoon The Simpsons, as if they were explaining it to a little kid by explaining it to me. They told me to imagine Mr. Burns, the owner of the power plant, wanting to get rid of the three-eyed fish that mutated from nuclear waste being illegally dumped in the local pond, and Mr. Burns wanting to keep the three-eyed fish off the news. Metaphorically speaking, in the situation, Donald Trump was Mr. Burns, I was the fish, and my hyperventilation syndrome was the fish's third eye mutation that Mr. Burns wanted to keep off the news. To clarify, the hyperventilation syndrome doesn't normally seem like anything that significant, but the hyperventilation syndrome was so severe that I easily could have broken the world record for hyperventilation syndrome. I was consistently hyperventilating for 3 hours at a time, straight, 3 times a day, every day for the first 9 months after it started, totaling 9 hours a day of hyperventilating. The hyperventilation syndrome was triggered by singular words and even triggered eventually just by certain colors, specifically the color red. I oftentimes was completely unable to leave my house and sometimes even my room for 1 to 2 days at a time. Whenever I did go in public, specifically grocery shopping, I would have people call ambulances on me and end up in the emergency room on a regular basis. I was also hypnotized to think the Make-A-Wish Foundation would give me everything I wanted but not everything I needed, because the Make-A-Wish Foundation could give a cancer patient what they wanted but not what they needed, like a cure for cancer. So that's what I was hypnotized to think the Billie Eilish song Everything I Wanted was about. I was hypnotized to think that the doctors would only give me Valium or Klonopin if I said I want Valium or I want Klonopin, and that if I said I needed it, that the doctors weren't going to give it to me. I was hypnotized to think the reasons the doctors wouldn't give me the medications if I said I needed it is because I would make the Make-A-Wish Foundation seem scary, because they wanted people to feel good for me since I got what I wanted, instead of people feeling bad for me because I needed my medications, and because they needed to cover up my PTSD symptoms and make it look like drug addiction, because no one wants to see a movie about someone needing medicine. In all reality, this was done so that I could be abused and deprived of what I needed, as well as to make it look like I didn't need my medications. I was also hypnotized to forget that Donald Trump was at all involved in the situation, and to think that it was all the rapper G-Eazy until after I was framed for the assault charges that they intended to frame me for. I was then cued to think Donald Trump responded to a letter that my friend wrote for me to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and, so there's a few different hypnotic metaphors that are going to be very specifically relevant. The first being quality over quantity, and then one called Charlie Sheen has AIDS, and then it's going to go over Valium and Klonopin specifically in the second part of this video. And I'll also be going over a lot of different things. So, moving on, I was told that every time I went grocery shopping or went out to eat that I was making commercials. I was told that Donald Trump had a contract with the Make-A-Wish Foundation where every dollar that I spent, Donald Trump had to spend $1 million to pay for the movie production and commercials. I was also told that COVID-19 was a zombie apocalypse theme for my movie, and that the COVID-19 stimulus bills were funding my movie production. The social worker that hypnotized me in Jordan Valley Medical Center financially exploited me by telling me that America's economy is based off products valuing quality over quantity, and that every product I'd buy would be sponsored by the company that made it, and that I needed to buy brand name products to advertise for them, which is obviously financial exploitation because brand name products are more expensive than generics, and it wasn't advertising anything. The social worker also told me that I had a Roche sponsorship, and that Roche was going to let me advertise Valium and Klonopin as high-quality pharmaceuticals in comparison to Xanax by Pfizer, which is FDA approved in stronger dosages and available in a larger quantity as a tranquilizer than Valium and Klonopin are FDA approved for. So Pfizer and Roche are both pharmaceutical companies. The social worker also told me that the cooks at Jordan Valley Medical Center really prided themselves on the quality of the food that they cooked, and that I was supposed to go back there and ask for Valium. The social worker told me that the sooner I went back to Jordan Valley Medical Center, that it meant the better their food was supposed to taste, and that their food was supposed to taste as good as I do, because all the girls want to eat me up. Get it? Kind of like a pun, a joke, metaphor. And these were used to, reinforce the belief that I was making a movie. So the better the food was, the better I was. I was also not supposed to mention Adderall in court, and I was told that if the judge asked about the Adderall, I was supposed to say Jordan Valley Medical Center has the best food in the world, guilty as charged, which was supposed to mean girls want to eat me up more than anyone else in the world, guilty as charged. The social worker at Jordan Valley Medical Center told me that Warren Buffett personally invested in hypnotic commands and hypnotizing me to prevent me from interfering with profits from his business, Berkshire Hathaway. And then just going over a very brief disclaimer, so about what I'm going to go discuss from the university. So the data regarding solar panel efficiency quoted Utah State University and is from the year 2013 is most likely outdated and discredited by a majority of the resources of information that are currently available and up to date. I was threatened for discussing concepts I learned in a college physics class at Utah State University regarding solar panel efficiency. Sorry about that. The hypnosis really inhibited me, so I'll say that one more time. I was threatened for discussing I'm going to say that again. I was threatened for discussing concepts I learned in a college physics class at Utah State University regarding solar panel efficiency. I was threatened not to talk about solar panel efficiency because the concept is that it requires more electricity from fossil fuels in order to manufacture a solar panel than the solar panel is able to produce in electricity in its lifetime. I was hypnotized to think that the reason Warren Buffett gave me death threats was because it made his multi-billion-dollar enterprise look like a joke, as if at Berkshire Hathaway they're all about quality over quantity, because it's not about how much electricity solar panels produce, it's about the quality of the electricity the solar panels produce. These hypnotic metaphors were the reason I messaged so many friends about Warren Buffett and posted about Warren Buffett on my Facebook as well. Let's see. I was also hypnotized to distract my attention from Donald Trump and redirect my attention to Warren Buffett with the multi-billionaire death threat metaphors, because Warren Buffett was one of the richest people on the planet and could pay a much larger ransom amount than Donald Trump would be able to. I was hypnotized to think that Warren Buffett would also pay several $1 billion for ransoms in exchange for a presidential exemption for any criminal activity that he was involved in. So I'll explain that in more detail and provide evidence of it in the next video. So, not saying that there's any concrete evidence that Warren Buffett was actually involved, by the way. So, acting performance. I was told that hypnosis was being used to control my bodily functions in order to improve my acting performance, such as suppressing cough reflex, mucus production, tear production, salivation, etc. Because they hypnotized me to think the movie was being recorded live, and that coughing could ruin a movie scene, for example, or suppressing my thirst and hunger while making movie scenes because they didn't want me to interrupt my movie scenes by getting food and water. In all reality, this was simply done to control me and prevent me from questioning the motives and ethics regarding why they hypnotized me. So, I'll also go ahead and quickly explain. One of the things that they did to me was they hypnotized me not to drink water unless I would notice I wasn't drinking enough water, unless someone else would notice I wasn't drinking enough water, or unless they would get caught for it. And I developed a medical condition called urinary incontinence as a result of that. So, I survived manslaughter from it. Now, moving on from that, I was also given a series of sexual threats towards my reproductive health and reproductive organs, that they were going to give me sexually transmitted diseases for being political. And this is about to get into Charlie Sheen has AIDS and hypnotic metaphors. So I was hypnotized to listen to Hollywood Undead, which is a musical group, when I was trying to move to California. And they were trying to stop me from leaving Logan so they could frame me. I was hypnotized to act like the Hollywood Undead member named Charlie Sheen and party recklessly to make the movie. And if I was medicating medical conditions, that I was supposed to be acting like Charlie Sheen because my acting was, quote, diseased and that they threatened to break my legs if anyone found out. So I'm going to go ahead and elaborate in further detail on that. And moving on. So I began folding and rolling a raw cigarette filter to roll a joint. And it was a cue to think, no, Matt, don't do that. That lets it out. I felt confused, ignored the suggestion, and proceeded to finish rolling the crutch anyways. As I proceeded to finish rolling the crutch, I was cued to think, wait, Matt, Charlie Sheen has AIDS. To which I responded with even more confusion, thinking, what does that have to do with anything? And proceeded to attempt to finish rolling the crutch again. Next, I was cued to think, wait, Matt, Charlie Sheen has AIDS. Or in other words, if anyone finds out, he can hire big men to break your legs. And then I was also cued to think, wait, Matt, Charlie Sheen is affiliated with cartels or drug cartels, and thought logically about how Charlie Sheen is very notorious, or was very notorious before he got sober, for his cocaine use, and that he very possibly could obtain or could have obtained cocaine from the Mexican cartel, and could very possibly have connections to people who could break people's kneecaps or legs, because I recalled a memory of my mother telling me how my dad was hanging out with people who broke people's kneecaps, and this was a very similar analogy to a South Park episode where Jared, who used to advertise for Subway, admitted that it wasn't just Subway sandwiches that helped him lose weight, and that he actually got AIDS to help him lose weight, which implied that he meant the medical condition, but he actually had assistants. A fitness trainer and dietitian aided him to lose weight. As a method of manipulating my behavior, I was cued to think that Charlie Sheen was going to break my legs for acting scared and hyperventilating because of his AIDS, because it would make his sex life seem scary, as well as how acting scared and hyperventilating was bad acting for my movie, or that my acting was diseased. They also hypnotized me to think, so like with the Charlie Sheen and Charlie Scene aspect, I was hypnotized to think that, to not know that, at the time, or to forget it at the time. So, anyways, they also hypnotized me to think that, if I acted scared of Charlie Sheen's AIDS, that it was like putting Charlie Sheen in a condom, because it would make girls scared of contracting AIDS from him, and that Charlie Sheen's AIDS were going to break my legs if I put him in a condom. I was hypnotized to think this was an attempt to help me improve my disease acting for my movie. I was hypnotized to think that G-Eazy was also threatening to break my legs if I made his music seem scary. And I was also hypnotized to think G-Eazy was a gangster while listening to the These Things Happen album, in an attempt to make him appear more scary and to deter me from listening to his music, because they wanted me to think that he was threatening me for listening to his music and being scared of him. I was hypnotized to think that if I didn't do drugs, and party, that my sex life would be a comedy, and that if I didn't drink and do drugs for fun, or used alcohol or drugs to self-medicate my medical conditions, that my sex life would be a comedy, because nobody wants to see a movie about someone taking medicine for medical conditions. I was hypnotized to think that I had to drink at least one beer every day in public, or G-Eazy would break my legs. And then when I was in jail, they wouldn't give me my meds because they don't prescribe any controlled substances in jail. And I was hypnotized to think that if I didn't stop hyperventilating, start smiling, and holding my hands in a ball like this in front of the jail cell door, and look at the camera, that my legs were going to be broken without knowing what it meant or why, but did it anyways out of fear. This was used to treat my hyperventilation syndrome and PTSD, as well as prevent me from breaking my legs to get my medications while I was in jail, because if I broke my legs just to go to the hospital so that they could give me the medications I needed, it would have been inevitable for me to have a medical malpractice lawsuit against the jail, and that I would be, quote, breaking the jail by breaking my legs. Because the jail could even get shut down from the lawsuit if the news got out that they are denying necessary medical care to inmates in the jail, and they didn't want that to happen. So they used that as a therapy to treat my PTSD so that I couldn't get medical malpractice from it and shut down the jail. I also remember Christine Price told me that the doctors hoped that I would break my legs and become crippled like my dog did when I was experiencing catalepsy from sleep deprivation after being taken off my sleeping medication, Ambien. By the way, I was also hypnotized to think about the doctors and how I was supposed to specify that, the doctors that I had medical malpractice against. So when I said, I also remember Christine Price told me that the doctors hoped that I would break my legs, it was actually supposed to be, I also remember Christine Price told me that the doctors I had medical malpractice against hoped that I would break my legs. And become crippled like my dog. I was hypnotized to think about that, right? And to think about the medical malpractice, and hypnotized to smile to try to make me look sick for it. That's an example of, they also did the same thing when I would talk about murder, for example, and then I would be hypnotized to smile talking about the word murder, and to feel euphoria and to feel like I'm in a daze and zoning out, so that I wouldn't notice. So, moving on from that, I also remember Christine Price told me that the doctors hoped that I would break my legs and become crippled like my dog did when I was experiencing catalepsy from sleep deprivation after being taken off my sleeping medication, Ambien, because I was falling on her. I was hypnotized to hold my hands in a ball for 3 hours straight one day, and I didn't know why, but did it anyways. I was hypnotized to think the ball represented a benzo, and that I had to hold it for 3 hours straight because of how I used to hyperventilate for 3 hours at a time, as an example of how much I actually needed my medications. So this was the ball that I was hypnotized to hold, right? So, and I was also hypnotized to think that this meant the world, and I had to elaborate more on the entire thing here. So, I'm going to go ahead and start doing that. A benzo is a shortened term used to refer to a type of medication called a benzodiazepine, which is a type of tranquilizer. I was also hypnotized to think that holding my hands on a ball for 3 hours straight meant I was holding the world record for hyperventilation syndrome. This actually successfully treated my hyperventilation syndrome and PTSD because the fear of breaking my legs from the hyperventilation syndrome and PTSD overpowered the fear caused by my PTSD, using fear to overcome fear. I was hypnotized to hold my hands on a ball behind my head and to shake my hands as if shaking a snow globe because it was supposed to mean I was going to sue Intermountain Healthcare for medical malpractice, and that I was shaking the world up because I was shaking down the hospital for money. And to imagine an earthquake happening at the hospital that I would be shaking down in a lawsuit for money, and to imagine the hospital in a snow globe. I was also hypnotized to think, in regards to, so I was hypnotized to hold this for 3 hours, and it was supposed to represent, me holding a benzo, not even knowing, and that's the world record, right, for hyperventilation syndrome. And then this is me shaking it up because I didn't know what it meant, and that's why Valium meant I didn't know. That's interesting. Wow. See, I didn't even know that. I didn't know. Moving on, I'll be explained in even further detail. So, I was also hypnotized to think the ball represented a bird trapped in a bird cage, which was a metaphor for me being in a jail cell, and that putting the jail over my head was like putting the jail time over my head so that I wouldn't break my legs in jail for medications, which is why the ball was also supposed to be a benzo. The hypnotic metaphor also references the suggestions relating to quality over quantity, and the hypnotic drawing with little Billie climbing the mountain for healthcare and pleading no contest to get out of jail for Valium, and the message going right over little Billie's head. I explained that in further detail in the next video, so make sure to watch that. So, like these would be like the, say for example, the bars of a jail cell, my fingers, in a metaphorical sense, right? Or, like in a birdcage. So, people actually did ask me what I was doing when I was standing in front of the jail cell door, smiling, staring at the camera, and doing this for hours, literally. And I can't remember what I said. I think I said like, I'm making a movie, and he's like, no, you're not. I'm like you're crazy. Like I think he's like trying to say like, Ben, you're like crazy, yo. And I'm like, dude, what are you talking about, yo? Like everybody knows I'm making a movie. Like you're crazy. Doesn't that sound horrible? Like, I think I only got asked like once or maybe twice. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, whatever. So, the hypnotic metaphor also references the suggestions relating to quality over quantity, and the I already talked about that. So I was hypnotized to think I needed to smile and look at the camera holding the ball in my hands because it was part of my movie, and the movie scenes were supposed to be like time-lapse videos or fast motion videos, similar to time-lapse videos of seasons changing, the sun rising and setting, or even weather changes on a weather radar over extended periods of time by speeding up the frame rate of the video by various multitudes. I was also hypnotized to think that holding my hands in a ball represented a snow globe because I was hypnotized to think of weather changes in a time-lapse video in order to imagine how the movie scenes I was making in the jail would look. And I was also hypnotized to think that as soon as I actually broke the news that my family, friends, and loved ones would actually be in danger, I was hypnotized to think that the news would be unsettling and would be shaking the world up as if the references to earthquake. Hold on a second. So, that's not the part that I wanted to include. And would be I was hypnotized to think the news would be unsettling and would be shaking the world up as if referencing an earthquake. So, I was hypnotized to think the unsettling news referenced unsettled. I was hypnotized to think the unsettling news referenced unsettled medical malpractice lawsuits. I was also hypnotized to think that water rising meant Bear River Mental Health was flooded with phone calls about me, and that there would be waves and phone calls in medical malpractice cases like there are waves in the ocean, referencing the song Ocean Eyes by Billie Eilish because I was hypnotized to think the song meant my dog Jewel because she has two different colored eyes, and that the waves of phone calls and lawsuits would be about how the medical malpractice lawsuit was so blatantly cruel, abusive, and unethical that even my dog became injured from it. Another form of metaphor for Charlie Sheen has AIDS was that there are medications that can help with the medical condition AIDS. And since the medications are helpful, the medications are like AIDS for AIDS in that sense. My medications helped me. Charlie Sheen has AIDS meant I had AIDS since I had my medications. I was hypnotized to think that since AIDS were like a form of help, like hearing aids, in that sense, the hypnotic metaphor was used to help my PTSD and hyperventilation syndrome, that the hypnotist gave me aids using hypnosis because they helped me with my medical conditions. I was also hypnotized to think that Charlie Sheen has AIDS was a reference to how I believe that the meaning of life is to help people, and that the speech I wrote regarding oxytocin and the meaning of life was like an STD because it was a, quote, moral oral presentation, and to prevent my videos from going viral, they had to inhibit my ability to speak. I was also hypnotized to think that if I had any viral videos, they'd be like cancer to the doctors because the doctors would try to stop the videos from spreading. And I was hypnotized to think that suing doctors meant killing doctors. I was hypnotized to think holding my hands in a ball meant I had the world in my hands as if holding a globe, and to think that holding my hands in a ball was also a reference to how on the cartoon show The Simpsons, the character Mr. Burns would hold his hands together in a ball and say, "Excellent," at his desk. I was also hypnotized to think the world and Mr. Burns metaphor was a reference to Donald Trump feeling excellent for preventing me from becoming famous for breaking the world record for hyperventilation syndrome. I was also hypnotized to think that the world and Mr. Burns metaphor also referenced environmental preservation because I intended to make, apply, and enforce the actual changes necessary to preserve the environment and address the climate crisis, as well as because Mr. Burns was depicted as greedy, corrupt, evil, and illegal, and illegally sorry about that. Let me rephrase that. As well as because Mr. Burns was depicted as greedy, corrupt, evil, and illegally dumping nuclear waste from his nuclear power plant into local lakes and ponds. While I was hypnotized, I explained I wanted to rise above all the evil, greed, and corruption in the world so that I could save the world and help people, and that the way I would literally save the world was by preserving the environment, because that is the world. That's our planet. I also explained that due to limited fossil fuels and overconsumption of fossil fuels, that we are facing an inevitability of eventually needing to limit fossil fuel consumption, and that the earlier we started, the easier it would be for society in the future. Christine Price told me that all the evil, greedy, and corrupt politicians and business owners wanted to keep doing what they were doing, didn't care if what they were doing was harmful to the environment or not, because they were profiting off of it, and that they didn't want the profits from their businesses limited because of fossil fuel consumption limitations and restrictions. So they hypnotized me to stop me so that they didn't have to. When I was hypnotized, I was given a series of different sexual threats. Since death threats only encouraged me because I was suicidal. The sexual threats mostly pertained to giving me STDs, organ failure, loss of organ function, and various different threats towards my reproductive health. Since I was rather politically progressive and wanted to make changes to improve our government, society, and to improve our government and society, sorry about that. Since I was rather politically progressive and wanted to make changes to improve our government and society, I was told that Donald Trump was a Republican and didn't want to change anything, that he wanted everything to stay the same, and that since my reproductive organs were healthy, that my reproductive organs didn't need to change, and that the more I wanted to change the world, the more they were going to change my reproductive organs and make them unhealthy. I was told that since Ziggy Marley's music inspired me to change the world, that they coined the term for the Ziggy Marley song, "Change Your World," because the more I wanted to change the world, the more they were going to change my world by changing my reproductive health. I was told that the Make-A-Wish Foundation was willing to help me make a movie to compensate for my PTSD and hyperventilation syndrome, as long as I didn't make a YouTube channel and as long as I didn't file a medical malpractice lawsuit, because the Make-A-Wish Foundation does a lot of charitable work for children with terminally ill medical conditions. So I was told that they needed to make me look mentally ill so that the public wouldn't find out my hyperventilation syndrome was caused by PTSD, abuse, and medical malpractice, so that the message would go right over little Billie's head, or little kids' heads, and children wouldn't be scared of doctors and hospitals. I was told I was supposed to act bipolar, party, do a lot of drugs, and spend a lot of money very quickly to cover up my hyperventilation syndrome. I was threatened for making a YouTube channel, needing my medications, acting scared, hyperventilating, or letting anyone find out I was being abused. I was threatened that the scarier I made the doctors and hospitals seem, the scarier I made the Make-A-Wish Foundation seem. I was threatened that the scarier I made the Make-A-Wish Foundation seem, the scarier they were going to make my sex life seem, and I was given a series of threats towards my reproductive health, which were mostly threats to give me sexually transmitted diseases for hyperventilating and acting scared. when I was hypnotized, they organized for me to meet certain people in certain places so that I could be unknowingly and involuntarily forced to contract 4 different sexually transmitted infections without being sexually active and repressing my memory of it. I contracted all 4 sexually transmitted infections in a matter of only a few months. The first sexually transmitted infection I contracted was a rare strain of human papillomavirus, which is a form of warts on the back of my hands. From shaking hands with a specific person they organized me to meet. The second sexually transmitted infection I contracted was gonorrhea from a motel room they organized me to stay in afterwards. The third sexually transmitted infection I contracted was syphilis, which I believe I contracted after meeting someone they organized me to meet in Colorado. He gave me some Xanax for my hyperventilation syndrome symptoms and began repeatedly asking me to take off my pants throughout the night. The Xanax made me fall asleep in his car, and the next day I went to an urgent care clinic to get checked for a red bump that suddenly appeared on my skin. The last sexually transmitted infection I contracted was MRSA, also known as a staph infection, which could have been premeditated using a variety of different methods. And I just wanted to also include here that so I contracted the gonorrhea from the motel room, and then I was hypnotized to think that the Xanax and the it was the syphilis was specifically the syphilis that I was hypnotized to think, like in my movie and everything, that I needed to get the gonorrhea treated before it got too severe or too late in the stage. So then they organized for this guy to take my pants off while I was asleep, so that I would have a red bump appear on my skin and force me to go to the urgent care, because what they didn't want me to mention was how the PTSD from the hyperventilation syndrome and the PTSD from being abused by doctors and from medical malpractice was deterring me from going to the emergency room, because I almost died from going to the emergency room twice within the same week due to blatantly negligent medical care. So, let's see. I was made to believe I was hypnotized to repress certain biological functions to improve my acting performance, which I already mentioned, so that I wouldn't question the changes in my biological functions. An example of this was instilling the belief that my senses of thirst and hunger were being repressed so that I wouldn't interrupt my movie scenes to get food or water. I was hypnotized not to drink water unless I noticed I wasn't drinking enough water, unless someone else noticed I wasn't drinking enough water, or unless they would get caught for it. I developed a condition called urinary incontinence, which is a loss of bladder function that developed as a result of being hypnotized to not drink water. The urinary incontinence impaired my reproductive health and sexual health as a method of instilling fear and intimidation to reduce resistance to post-hypnotic suggestions. I was also given various other threats towards my reproductive health and sexual health. So just like the Charlie Sheen has AIDS, post-hypnotic suggestions, that was used so that I would be afraid and to force me to feel like I needed to comply. I was hypnotized to increase the frequency I smoked cigarettes. I was also given various other threats towards my reproductive and sexual health. I was hypnotized to increase the frequency I smoked cigarettes, and I was told that my mucosal production and cough reflex were being repressed from my movie production. I was made to believe that the repressed mucosal production and cough reflex increased my risk of developing lung cancer and lung disease. I used to suffer from very severe smoker's cough, and even though the frequency of my smoking only increased up until earlier this year, actually, I quit smoking, the hypnosis completely eliminated the symptoms and raised more concerns for my health. Because, it's just like gone, but like I didn't stop smoking or slow down, until like, I want to say this was March of this year, maybe February. Anyways, and I quit smoking because I noticed that the hypnosis was using smoking to abuse me. Basically, because I was hypnotized to increase my the urge to smoke cigarettes and the urge for nicotine with hypnosis, and I noticed that the cigarette cravings weren't even being caused by withdrawal. It was just being caused by hypnosis. Because literally, I remember I was writing about some of this stuff, and I was feeling nauseated, so I put out my cigarette, half smoked, right? Felt like I had too much nicotine, put it out, and then I was supposed to the hypnosis was intended to try to make me take a break at that point and to stop working, but I kept working anyways. I went right back to it. And then as soon as I went right back to working, I was all of a sudden hypnotized to feel no nausea and to feel a sudden intense urge to smoke a cigarette. And, in less than 60 seconds, literally. So, I mean, I went from too much nicotine, excessive nicotine consumption, to nicotine cravings and withdrawals, and that doesn't make sense. In the normal circumstances, but considering the hypnosis being used to abuse and torture me, it made sense. So then I quit smoking just because of that. It was being used as a method of controlling me and distracting me and abusing me. Let's see. I used to suffer, I was told that the hospitals and doctors were going to lie to me about any medical conditions I developed as part of the contract for the movie production. I was hypnotized to think the medication Klonopin meant I was making movie scenes, and that the medication Valium meant an emergency medical intermission for my movie so that I could get actual medical care. But I was hypnotized to not know what they were supposed to mean. I was hypnotized to feel back pain in the small of my back in between my shoulder blades, and severe muscle tension on the right side of my back underneath my shoulder blade, so that I'd have to crack my back frequently for relief. I was told that they did this to me because they wanted me to develop back problems, impairing my sexual performance and making sexual intercourse seem painful, which is why I was hypnotized to think you can't be sexy for it. Whenever I tried to crack my back, because I would have to push my chest out to do it, and it just wouldn't exactly look very charming necessarily. Whenever I tried to to finish that, which is why I was hypnotized to think you can't be sexy for it whenever I tried to crack my back. The Charlie Sheen has AIDS hypnotic metaphor was another threat towards my sexual and reproductive health. I was hypnotized to think that if I jumped off a flight of stairs in jail for medications, that I might not only break my legs, but that I could actually fracture my spinal cord as well, and that I could become paralyzed from the waist down as a result, which would not only mean I would never be able to walk again, but that I would never be able to hump again either. I was also hypnotized to think about taking my dog on a walk when I thought about never being able to walk again if I jumped off a flight of stairs, which is further evidence that Christine Price told me that the doctors hoped that I would break my legs and become crippled like my dog did when I experienced catalepsy from sleep deprivation after being taken off my sleeping medication, Ambien. And I was hypnotized to think about taking my dog on a walk, because I wouldn't even be able to take my dogs out on a walk ever again if I, became paralyzed from the waist down. Let's see. Since I was hypnotized to think that holding my hands in a ball meant that I had the world in my hands, I was also hypnotized to think it was a reference to Billie Eilish's documentary. The world's a little blurry, because the world, right, it would be this, would be from a security camera that would be way across the entire block, of the room, right? So you'd see from a very large distance, right? So, the world, right? Like me holding my hands in the ball, this, oh yeah, this, would be blurry in the jail security camera footage. So, I was also hypnotized to think presenting the security footage from the jail as evidence in court meant the world's a little blurry too, and Stanford County Prison Experiment 2 and MK Ultra 2, because it would be like a sequel to the the two different documentaries and then the experiment. I was also hypnotized to think Billie Eilish's documentary, The World's a Little Blurry, was a reference to my dog's cataracts, because when my dog would go outside, the world would be a little blurry. Sorry about that. The world would be a little blurry because her vision was blurry. Since she had cataracts. I was also hypnotized to think Charlie Sheen has AIDS meant Charlie Sheen has dogs, because my dogs helped me with my hyperventilation syndrome and PTSD symptoms, and because my dogs were referenced multiple times in the hypnotic metaphors. So, anyways, there's that, and then we're almost done with this video. I was hypnotized to remember a time when I was told by a Catholic woman that some people actually believe that ADHD isn't real, and that it was a type of demonic possession because amphetamine medications would have paradoxical effects on ADHD patients and calm them down. When I was hypnotized, I was told that they were going to help me improve my handwriting with hypnosis because I had very messy and sloppy handwriting since I have ADHD, and I was told that the reason they helped me improve my handwriting was because if I was going to be the president, that they just can't have a president with sloppy handwriting. I was hypnotized to because like they sign bills and how the Constitution was written and all that kind of stuff. Sloppy signatures, just kind of like, come on, right? Anyways, I was hypnotized to think that analyzing handwriting was, quote, worshipping the devil, end quote, because I learned to analyze handwriting from being hypnotized to improve my handwriting because I had ADHD. So if I was analyzing handwriting, it was because I have ADHD, and since ADHD is the devil, then analyzing handwriting was, quote, worshipping the devil, end quote. I was hypnotized to think of a pitchfork when I wrote a capital letter Y, and that if I was analyzing my handwriting changes, that it was a devil's pitchfork. I was also hypnotized to think that when I was hypnotized to draw on the walls of the jail, that it also meant I was worshipping the devil. The handwriting and drawings were how I identified John Matthew Hurl was hypnotized when he wrote the death threat letters, and since I was hypnotized to think that analyzing his handwriting and drawings meant I was worshipping the devil, that everything I would be able to do to investigate the death threat letters was, quote, worshipping the devil. I was hypnotized to think that writing with a pencil wasn't classy, and that writing with a ballpoint pen was classy, and to imagine when I was writing with a ballpoint pen how founding fathers wrote with a feather dipped in ink, because I was going to make history and become the president. How the founding fathers wrote with a feather dipped in ink. So, moving on from that, Christine Price rephrased that signing the contract with G-Eazy and Donald Trump and the Make-A-Wish Foundation, making a movie and letting Donald Trump run the country for me was like a little, quote, deal with the devil, end quote. Christine Price also told me that Donald Trump came up with the idea for Marlboro Cigarette Company to buy cannabis for cannabis cigarettes from the Mexican cartel after cannabis was legalized. Christine Price also told me that Donald Trump made a deal with Marlboro Cigarette Company that Marlboro was going to pay me to advertise their cigarettes, by smoking their cigarettes during my movie, and that Donald Trump was supposed to be my devil's advocate for doing it. I was told that since Donald Trump did this, that I wouldn't have to be scared of violent retaliation from the Mexican cartel for legalizing cannabis, because the Mexican cartel could actually legally profit from cannabis legalization instead of losing tremendous amounts of profit. I was told that devil's advocate meant doing something immoral but doing it anyways, because it wasn't that bad. I was hypnotized to think devil's advocate often when I took my first drag off a cigarette, without knowing that taking my first drag off a cigarette was what cued the thought, and what devil's advocate was even supposed to mean. I was also told that Marlboro Cigarette Company had a contract that would protect me from contracting sexually transmitted diseases during the movie, as long as I smoked their cigarettes during my movie. I was also hypnotized to think that devil's advocate meant I can get laid again. Since the actor Will Smith was actually offered a lot of money from cigarette companies to smoke cigarettes in his movies, but did the moral thing and refused to set a bad example for children by smoking in his movies, this was used as an example for why Donald Trump would be playing devil's advocate for me to smoke in my movie, because it was immoral, but that I should do it anyways because it wasn't that bad. Devil's advocate was a hypnotic metaphor used to attempt to demoralize me by conditioning me to believe that being moral and doing the right thing was the wrong thing to do, because I would contract sexually transmitted diseases from it. But if I acted immorally, that I would be able to get laid again. This was also a method of keeping me addicted to cigarettes and financial exploitation, as well as because Marlboro cigarettes were expensive. And Republicans. They told me that since Donald Trump was Republican and doesn't want to change anything, that as long as I was a Republican and let Donald Trump run the country for me, that I could have sex again. They told me metaphors while I was hypnotized that pertained to the syllables that comprise the word Republican. I was hypnotized to think of an Irish pub because of the syllable pub in the word Republican, and to think that it meant I could drink alcohol and it's not a big deal. I was hypnotized to think that the syllables lickin' in the word Republican meant lickin' or licking, and was a reference to oral sex, like licking a lollipop. I was hypnotized to think that the syllable re in the word Republican meant as long as I sorry about that. I was hypnotized to think the syllable re in the word Republican meant I could do these things repetitively as long as I let Donald Trump run the country for me and I was a Republican, because I could go to a pub and get a lickin' over and over again. This was a hypnotic metaphor threatening me that referenced being hypnotized to not drink water and developing urinary incontinence, and an attempt to deter me from lobbying for political reform. So, these are things that, you would think, okay, they're like not necessarily that, not like that bad, right? I mean, drinking alcohol is like unhealthy, and of course, oral sex is not, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But, as long as you're safe about it, and of course, there's some moral and ethical aspects of how it should be done according to some religious beliefs as well. Say for example, including marriage and everything along those lines. But basically, things that weren't necessarily that bad that I could just enjoy, right? Like having like drinking alcohol. Well, drinking alcohol is really bad for urinary incontinence and it can worsen it. And then urinary incontinence also impairs sexual health and, would basically, make the experience unpleasant or more difficult than normal. So, that's what that was a reference to. And then red devils. I was hypnotized to think that red devils were Republicans because Republicans Sorry about that. I was hypnotized to think that red devils were Republicans because Republicans were represented by the color red, and because they'd advocate for me to behave immorally as long as I was. Sorry about that. I'm being tortured and abused with hypnosis. I'll read that again. I was hypnotized to think that red devils were Republicans because Republicans were represented by the color red, and because they'd advocate for me to behave immorally as long as I was Republican, as if they were playing devil's advocate. I was also hypnotized to think that Republicans were like red devils because they were, quote, horny. Democrats. I was hypnotized to, and by the way, so when I was reading about that red devils thing, I noticed I made an unusual facial expression and I was having the difficulty speaking. And the difficulty speaking was used to distract my conscious attention from my facial expressions. Democrats. I was hypnotized to think that they were going to force me to involuntarily contract sexually transmitted diseases if I was a Democrat. I was hypnotized to think that the more I wanted to change the world, the more they were going to change my reproductive health and reproductive organs, making me unhealthy. I was hypnotized to think that this was a reference to a Ziggy Marley song called Change Your World, and a reference to the Obama campaign slogan, quote, change, end quote. I was also hypnotized to think if I was a Democrat that my sex life would be like a video game demo because I could try being a Democrat, but after I try it, I might not like it because my sex life would only be a demo. Kind of a metaphor for, I could try it, but I'm, not going to be able to enjoy it, or I did the whole thing. Now, moving on. One of the methods used to deter me from articulating speech was by hypnotizing me to feel back pain every time I attempted to speak clearly and fluently without excessive pauses, breaks, interruptions in my speech as a method of punishing me for trying to. I was also hypnotized to feel back pain to conceal hypnotic commands of rigid movements, forceful and strenuous speech, and abnormal facial expressions. I was hypnotized to associate attempting to overcome the hypnotic speech impairment with the figure of speech rolling off my tongue because I was trying to force my speech to roll off my tongue. The figure of speech is a metaphor for words sounding well articulated like a ball rolling smoothly off your tongue. I was also hypnotized to spin my arms in a circle, which was supposed to mean they were inhibiting my speech, and to think it meant rolling with the punches because I couldn't speak normally with the words rolling off my tongue. I was also hypnotized to think rolling with the punches meant Justin Bieber was beating me up about it, referring to Justin Bieber beating up G-Eazy for giving me STDs, for diseasing G-Eazy's career by not liking G-Eazy's music enough during my movie, and referring to Justin Bieber beating up the social worker at Jordan Valley Medical Center for abusing me with hypnosis, and the I don't want to be you anymore hypnotic metaphor was used to add confusion with a tangential embedded loop because since they were going to abuse me so much with hypnosis that I wouldn't want to be myself anymore, so they hypnotized me to act like I was them instead of myself, and so that I could understand why it was phrased as Justin Bieber was beating me up about it without other people understanding it meant Justin Bieber was beating them up about it, because I was hypnotized to act like them. So I was also hypnotized to think rolling with the punches meant I was fighting the hypnosis and Justin Bieber was beating me up about it. And I was hypnotized to do this, right? Anyways, so fighting the so I was hypnotized to think rolling with the punches meant I was fighting the hypnosis by trying to articulate my speech, and I was hypnotized to and fighting for my rights, and hypnotized to imagine punching a speed bag, which is a small punching bag that is used by spinning arms in a circle to punch the bag. So, like when you see people doing that training, like, I think you see that in some of the Rocky movies, for example. Anyways, I was also hypnotized to think rolling off my tongue and rolling with the punches meant it was like I was doing ecstasy, because the slang term for ecstasy is rolling. The drug MDMA, or ecstasy, has been researched for marital counseling due to the drug's ability to promote feelings of empathy and understanding, which can also be described as providing a missing connection between couples that can help save marriages. I was hypnotized to think having the ability to speak with the words rolling off my tongue was like ecstasy, because people would be able to understand me and have empathy for me, and they didn't want people to be able to understand me or have empathy for me because they were abusing me. I was also hypnotized to think the feelings of connection caused by ecstasy referenced how the embedded loops of metaphors need to be connected to be understood. So when I would say I was hypnotized to think ... it would typically be an incomplete hypnotic metaphor and an embedded loop of metaphors. People would also commonly assume I was insane because the metaphors are not literal. The metaphors are symbolic, and the metaphors are commonly embedded in loops, as well as the hypnosis inhibiting my ability to speak, resulting in my descriptions of the metaphors seeming illogical. For example, I'd be consciously entertained and distracted from the visualizations they associate with the metaphors, like imagining a punching bag, so that hypnotic commands, like spinning my arms in a circle walking down the street, or that Justin Bieber was fighting for me, so that I wouldn't question those, right? So that I wouldn't question the hypnotic commands like spinning my arms in a circle, walking down the street, or that Justin Bieber was fighting for me. And by fighting for my rights, that's also, First Amendment right is freedom of speech in the United States. So they violated my constitutional rights. So, like imagining a punching bag so that I wouldn't question, because I was hypnotized to exclude that part. So I'm writing it down. And then explaining embedded loops of metaphors can be extremely difficult, resulting in me talking in circles, attempting to explain it quickly, especially with the hypnotic speech impairment. So it's not like I could make a 1 to 10 minute video and successfully explain the embedded loops of metaphors. For example, if I'm explaining an embedded loop with 30 different metaphors, I'd have to explain each metaphor in 2 seconds or less in order to make a 1 minute video. Democrat. I was hypnotized to think Democrat meant democrack or domocrack, because the rigid, intense muscle movements concealed by being hypnotized to feel back pain were comparable to robotic movements or the dance The Robot. I was also hypnotized to think that breaking my back meant inhibiting my speech. I was hypnotized to think Democrat meant demograph, because they tried to limit the demographics my videos would be reaching to prevent public exposure of torture, abuse, and organized crime by making the content inappropriate and graphic to prevent children from watching. Hypnotized to imagine spine, or my spine, as a row of nuts tied on a string and cracking them when I cracked my back, or like a firecracker when I cracked my back. Firecrackers are explosives tied together on a string, and firecrackers will crack each other, each explosive, in a successive order. Hypnotized to imagine embedded loop metaphors or nested loop metaphors as a series of hypnotic metaphors tied together on a string like a firecracker. At first I looked nuts explaining the embedded loop metaphors they used until the embedded loop metaphors are connected and they become mind-blowing. Mind-blowing can be a hypnotic metaphor to firecrackers because comprehending the embedded loops of metaphors is explosively mind-blowing. Hypnotized to write small, illegible, rewrite, and frequently erase, to conceal hypnotic commands to squint while reading because the squinting would cause bags to develop under my eyes as a method of making me appear sleep-deprived. When I wasn't, I was hypnotized to think that the vertebrae in my spine were like morals because they were like uneven orbs. I was hypnotized to think of the orbs as pearls and orals because they were inhibiting my speech. I was also hypnotized to associate the metaphor with my dog Jewel because they hit me in my jewels by harming my reproductive health. To loop the hypnotic metaphors back together like a loop in a bow, like when you tie a bow. Pearls are valuable jewels and metaphorically could be considered values. Looping back to morals because morals are values, which is why they told me they were going to inhibit my, quote, moral oral. The values could also relate back to the quality over quantity hypnotic metaphor because as a form of financial exploitation, I was hypnotized to buy brand name products to get our country out of debt because it added value to American-made products because we value quality over quantity. I was also hypnotized to think of when I was hypnotized I was also hypnotized to think of when I was hypnotized to think. Several people were taken hostage. And this related back to the death threats because it was about the quality of the hostages over the quantity of the hostages. I was hypnotized to think the vertebrae in my spine were like morals because they were my family and friends, or like my family jewels because they were valuable. I was also hypnotized to think of pearls because one of my dog's eyes is a bluish white which resembles a pearl and is the reason my dog is named Jewel. Inside my mind was a black box that kept something special that I value, like a treasure chest that I kept my treasures or morals and values safe in that was repressed from my memory until now. The black box was an unconscious symbol to a secret and a mystery. Cracking my back or cracking a chestnut open was a metaphor for cracking the treasure chest open. Upon cracking the treasure chest open, I found some valuable treasures or family jewels. I found my family and friends, and death threats to my family and friends, my loved ones. The reason I was hypnotized to crack the small of my back, which is the part of my spinal cord located directly in the middle, horizontally and vertically, and in between the shoulder blades, and in between my shoulder blades, the reason I was hypnotized to crack the small of my back, which is the part of the spinal cord located directly in the middle, horizontally and vertically, and in between the shoulder blades, is in order to crack the small of my back, I had to squeeze my shoulder blades together and extend my chest forward, which was like cracking my chestnuts open because I had to push my chest out to crack it. So I'm going to go ahead and just demonstrate. It's like doing that, right? So then this motion would crack my back or my spine right in the middle of my shoulder blades. So you can see where I'm pushing my chest out, right? And, it almost kind of would also look like a posture would be a duck-leg, right? So anyways, that's the video. Remember, there's going to be part 2 of this video too. So this was, Billie Eilish and Post-Hypnotic Suggestions part 1. So thanks for watching the video. Have a great day.